Right, folks, brew time. Brew time podcast this week is a little bit different. I'm here at the Armchair Adventure Festival down at Mount Edgecombe Park, and we're doing some live podcasts here in front of a crowd. There's 2 people behind. Folks, if you want to come join us, feel free. 3. We've got 3 now. So I'm going to be doing a selection of podcasts over the weekend, today and tomorrow. They're going to be a little bit shorter, maybe an hour and a half, we'll see. But we've got some cracking guests lined up. The first of which is Chris Howard. How you doing, Chris?
Hello, I'm good. Thank you, Bruce. Nice to meet you and be here.
And you, man. And you. Now, Chris, you are famous for going on a bit of a walk.
The weird thing is, I'm probably famous for lots of other things, but this is what everybody knows me for as my most recent adventure. But yeah, I'm famous for going on a bit of a walk.
I had a look at your bio and I was like, why have I never heard of all this? I'd only heard about Chris the Coast Walker, and it's like, oh my God, you've done all this other stuff.
So, do you know, I think what it is I'm Chris Howard, but everybody knows me as Chris the Coast Walker.
Yeah.
So that's what's stuck in people's head. But actually, Chris Howard has done a lot of things before the Coast Walk.
So, can I throw this open to you then? So, for the people at home, for the people here, who are you? What have you done?
I am Chris Howard, Chris the Coast Walker, British adventurer, fellow of the Royal Geographic Society. I've walked the Himalayas, walked the whole of the western archipelago of Thailand and all of its islands. I've backpacked across Russia. I've overlanded in Morocco, been up the Atlas Mountains. I rode across the Atlantic Ocean before anybody else rode across an ocean. I did it when it was still cool. I don't mean that for you guys over there who are leaving in January. We've already had a chat. I walked around the entire coast of Britain. I have done all sorts of other mad things: marathon runner, triathlons, long distance swims. And most recently walked the entire coast of Britain. And I'm a dad. So.
Why do I not know about any of that other than the walk around the UK? What happened?
So I think probably that when I first started adventuring, I literally left home just before the age of 18 and went off into distant realms unheard of by any of my friends and family. Smartphones didn't exist. I didn't have a mobile phone, let alone a smartphone. Yeah. Now the world is totally different. You know, we've got amazing guys here from Splash Maps. I've always used a map. But that might have been in the back of a rough guide or a Lonely Planet book. But I never had a map on my phone, and I never had a phone to help me get around the country. I remember being in India for 9 months and finding my way around India by going into internet cafes. I don't even know if internet cafes still exist, because what would be the point in them when you've got them in your
Exactly,
house?
Everything's on your phone now.
Exactly. And so I've always done things with other people as well. And I did a few things on my own, but I never really saw the value in having a website. And also, a bit like Jamie Ramsey, I'm totally self-funded unless I'm able to gain sponsorship from certain people or companies. And so a website has a cost, promotion has a cost, marketing has a cost. And I genuinely never thought I was that interesting.
Sorry, if you just pop the mic up towards you.
Sorry, is that much better? So I genuinely never thought I was that interesting until people started asking me questions and asking if they could interview me. So I kind of am an accidental adventurer, really.
No, not really, with a pedigree like what you've got. But have you found now you're embracing social media, because the Coast Walk was that was heavily. I followed that on Instagram. You seem to be all over that during then. Have you found that there's been a big pickup in terms of following, in terms of like corporate interest?
Yeah, it's been very strange, because up until the Coast Walk, I didn't really have a social media account. I mean, I'm a family man. I got 3 daughters, and I don't really use it. They probably know more about it than me, and they're still too young to actually be on it, to be honest with you. My wife uses it a lot. I don't know how you do it. So she supported me using the social media and showing me how to do that sort of stuff. But what I really wanted to do was write and write a blog. So I've always kept a journal of my adventures. I've never released anything. And then all of a sudden I started writing, and my following actually rocketed because of the blogs that I was writing.
Yeah.
And that was partly to do with physically what was happening to me, and also to do with my mental health and the things I was experiencing. A lot of people could relate to that. So, it went bananas, to be honest with you.
Now, The way I normally run things on this is we have a little chat, and then normally I'll post up beforehand. Normally I do these one a week, and I'll post up beforehand on socials to say who the next guest is. And then people have an opportunity to post up some questions. Obviously, this is a bit of a unique environment that we're doing, but we're getting a little bit of a crowd coming here. So in about 10 minutes or so, folks, I'm going to ask any of you guys if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask Chris. So over the next 10 minutes, have a little think whilst we have a little chat, and then I'll throw the floor open to you. Is that all right? Perfect. Unless anyone's got one right now. Has anyone got a question they want to ask right now?
A burning question. Anybody got a burning desire they must ask?
Right, so getting question. The question was, folks at home. The question was, has getting corporate sponsorship, has that changed since COVID?
Yeah, so that is a really, really good question and well picked up on. It was a bit of a leading question. So Jamie and I are actually both sponsored by Cotswold Outdoor, but we've never met. So this was the first opportunity. And just literally before he gave a talk, I ran up to him gushing like a schoolboy saying, I can't believe it's you. And we had a little chat, and hopefully we might have a beer together later. But the reason I asked that is because I'm about to do something in November, and I'm struggling now to get sponsorship for it. But conversely, to a lot of other people, just post-lockdown, I managed to gain quite a bit of sponsorship because I was suddenly doing something that nobody else was doing. And actually, it was a good news story where there'd been lots of negativity in the press. Yeah. So, that kind of helped in a way for me. But it is much, much more difficult to gain corporate sponsorship now.
That's interesting. See, I did my trip on the bike 10 years ago, and it was nigh on impossible to get corporate sponsorship. I sort of had, by a fluke occurrence, sort of a third of the way through the trip, managed to pick up a sponsor, but I wasn't even looking at them at that point. They approached me, so it was a total fluke. But everywhere else, people would give kit, but they just wouldn't give the actual readies, funds, to help with it. I found that massively hard to get the financial side of it. How did you go about, because obviously you've got a wealth, you've got one heck of a CV there of things you've achieved. How did you go about originally acquiring sort of the corporate help?
So actually, a lot of my early adventures, I think, were quite selfish, and I did them because I had no responsibilities. I was a young man. I'd saved money by working in jobs and leaving school and things like that, and I just was fully self-funded. So I always expected to be that way and fund my adventures myself. It wasn't until I decided to row the Atlantic that became a reality of, actually, I can't do this myself. This is way too expensive. And now, this was 10 years ago, now it costs 10 times what it did for me to row the Atlantic. And I was fully unsupported. I didn't do it as part of the Talisker Whiskey Challenge. I didn't do anything like that. I didn't do Woodvale or anything.
Do you know how cool that sounds to say that you rowed the Atlantic without any support?
Well, you say that, Bruce, but I was explaining to these guys earlier, and just like I quipped about it, when I rowed the Atlantic with my best friend, we were the first unsupported crew since the original Harbour Crossing, which is cooler, right? However, none of my friends, none of my family, nobody we knew anybody that had rowed an ocean. Now, I guarantee you there's 50 people at this festival that have rowed an ocean. Yeah. And so it's not really cool anymore. And so for me, it feels like a strange thing. But actually, it's a nice community to be part of. And, these guys knew who I was before I even asked them what they were up to, and that was lovely, and we're going to have a little planning session together at some point as well.
Mega. The whole adventure, not just, I used to think it was the bike adventure community was really close-knit and tight, but it's actually everybody, isn't it? Like, especially events like this where it's not just motorbikes, it's all sorts of stuff. Everyone, if you have that mindset of getting out there, going for it, doing it, and you're open to meeting people as you would be coming to events like this and when you travel, everyone has that same sort of mindset, don't they? Everyone's very friendly, very open.
Indeed, and I think that's partly to do with adventure mindset. Adventure isn't really a job. I might do it professionally and I might try at least to earn money out of it where I can. But the truth is, it isn't a job and it's not a vocation. It's a way of life, and it's a way of thinking and approaching the way you do things. You can apply it in every walk. And at the moment, I go into corporate organizations, companies give talks and do motivational things and team building sessions and stuff like that. That is a way to fund adventure. That's a job. Mm-hmm. And a bit like Jamie said earlier, if you have a plan for the adventure, it becomes an itinerary, and that's just like a holiday that you book through a package tour.
Yeah.
Actually, the adventure is going and doing it and getting on with whatever occurs. and that was for me how it started. The first adventure I went on, I flew off to Bangkok. My folks had never heard of Bangkok. My sister was terrified. My friends they'd never even seen pictures of Thailand, sort of thing. This was before the internet was really in everybody's homes. So it was really difficult to understand what I'd be seeing, what I'd be doing, and that kind of, when I came home, created a gulf of difference between us.
Yeah.
And that's the same after every adventure, and you kind of, as an adventurer, have to learn to kind of make that gulf smaller.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, does the post-trip blues, does that affect you? Because I know, like, from personal experience in the bike world, it is something that was never really spoken about, but people are much more open about now. But then where, I was away for a year and a half, other people, they've been away for decades. So
yeah.
Do you experience that sort of post-trip?
Yeah, absolutely.
Downer?
It's the same, though, for anyone that might be racing with Mayflower rowing crew down the road here in Plymouth. It's the same for anybody that runs a marathon or anybody that goes park run every weekend. It's the same for anybody that has that burst of adrenaline or serotonin release or oxytocin release. I wrote a blog about this because I'm interested in science and how it affects us physiologically. I'm interested in how we evolve as human beings. And so on the walk, when I was walking around the coast of Britain, I completed 450 consecutive marathons, carrying my backpack of what started out at 12 kilos, and by the winter in Scotland, it was about 25 to 30 kilos. That all sounds very, very difficult, but actually, you evolve very quickly. You get used to things. Your body is so amazing, and physiologically, what it's doing is giving you little reward systems every second. So the end of every day, I was getting that hit of serotonin, that hit of oxytocin, that hit of adrenaline. All the way, I was on this massive cocktail of natural drugs. Then you come home, and it's gone. That's not because you've got post-event blues that everybody says, oh, you shouldn't be like this. You've done it now, and that's a great achievement. You should be proud of that.
Yeah.
It's a physiological thing. It's a chemical response pattern. You are going to feel low because those chemicals are no longer giving you that reward feeling, that pleasure sensation.
So how do you deal with that then? Being somebody that does this professionally, because you must get that time and time and time again. How do you deal with it when you come back? Is it focus on the next thing?
That's a better answer. I was going to say beer helps, but it is, focus on the next thing, a bit like Jamie said earlier. Again, I keep referring to him mainly because I'm still in that like school kid crush phase. Anyway, it's focus on the next thing. Think about what you've done. Have the perspective about it. What you've done is amazing, but nobody cares more about it than you.
Yeah, totally.
That's the truth. You're giving me a podcast now, but you get home after this massive adventure, there's a big celebration, everybody comes to meet you, they all go home. You're the one that has to wake up the next day and think, what next?
Yeah. I can relate to that massively. Yeah. So, did you say Thailand? Thailand was your first adventure, and what did you do out there?
Yeah, and what a place to have a first adventure,
absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
So, absolutely mad place, a complete bombardment of the senses. I was a kid that grew up in a pretty rough area, pretty deprived background, had a fairly abusive childhood, and it wasn't a great time for me. I was a scout, which I'm very proud about being a scout ambassador now. But I finished all my exams a bit before most of my friends, just because of the way the exams fell. So I decided that I would book a flight. Actually, I hadn't decided that first. I walked home from school one day, and I came via Chatham High Street, which I grew up in Kent, and there was a military surplus store. I always wanted to join the Navy because my grandfather was in the Navy, and I wanted to kind of follow in his footsteps and travel the world. My nan is from Malaysia. He met her whilst he was serving in Malaysia. That's why I look a bit the way I do. And so I went into this military surplus store, and it was stacked high with maps and cellophane-wrapped socks and T-shirts and all the stuff. And it smelled a bit like a library, that musty, dusty old smell of like army blokes, really. And right in the corner of the store was a backpack, and I'd never had a backpack. At school, we always had these satchels, which you had your lunchbox in and things like that. It's great big 180-litre black Bergen. And I remember it was bigger than me. And I could see it in the corner of the room. And I remember, because I've just written about it in my first book, and I remember it in my head. It was almost like it was winking at me. And you kind of try and look away, but every now and again your gaze comes straight back to it. And I kept looking away, and it was there again. So Just go and have a quick look at it. And I picked this thing. It had a metal frame. It had these straps, really thick, all these buckles on it and everything, and pockets. And I thought, God, this is amazing. But in my head, I didn't know what I was saying. And all I could think was, well, I can't do that. I can't be a traveler. I can't be a backpacker. You know, look where I've got. Just failed all my exams, and then I'm lucky to have scraped through into college. There's no way I can travel the world. Adventurer wasn't even in my vocabulary at that time.
Yeah.
And so the biggest leap I took really was asking the bloke behind the counter how much the bag was. And it felt like an absolute age while he inspected every clasp and zip and buckle. And I stood there. And in my heart of hearts, I actually knew that I wouldn't be able to afford it. And I would have to walk away, and that would be my dream crushed.
Gone.
Short-lived, though. And so he looked up with his typical Medway accent, pushed his glasses on his face, and he just went, 12 quid, mate? 12 quid? You know, like 20 years ago, actually, I was thinking, it's not that bad.
Yeah.
And I had it in my pocket, and I was like 17 years old. So I was like, I'll have that. But I think he knew what that backpack meant to me and what it represented, and it wasn't the ability to carry stuff. I think that backpack represented freedom. So we're here now talking at this amazing festival, some 22 years on, and 12 quid might buy you 2 pints and maybe a splash mat. But 20 years ago, 12 quid bought you freedom.
Opened up the world to you, yeah.
And that's that perspective again, you know.
So what did you do in Thailand? Well, you don't need to go into too much detail, but like what was Thailand? Was Thailand a walk? Was it a run? Was it a cycle? Was it just backpacking, traveling?
It was backpacking and walking. I'd set myself the goal of starting in Bangkok and walking as far south as I could possibly get in Thailand. And if I could get to Malaysia...
Where were you heading to in southern Thailand? Tell me.
I have no idea. I had no map. And as I said before, I had no phone. iPads didn't exist. It was the weirdest sensation arriving in Bangkok alone, having never really been away from home except on scout camp. You know?
What a crazy city as your first one.
Yeah, and Coastline Road for 2 or 3 days was just a complete mind.
You did well to leave, to be perfectly honest with you. Well, many people just don't get any further than that.
Yeah, well, to be honest, the guy in the MOD store that gave me the backpack, when I told him that I'd booked a flight to Thailand, he said, get out of Bangkok as
you might need
you
these as well, son. Yeah.
And he's speaking as a former officer in the army and has a lot of experience, I'm sure. But yeah, he said get out of Bangkok as soon as you can. So I did. But the strange thing about it is I had no plan. I just wanted to get as far south as possible, see as much of the country as possible, and fully immerse myself in their culture, which was totally different to anything I'd ever experienced. Now, the weird thing was all my friends back home were going on, package holidays or... like 1830s club holidays to Spain and Greece and things like that, and doing what all young men do back in the late 90s, and spending their money on driving lessons and girls, basically.
Yeah.
So I didn't want any of that. I wanted to really experience it. I'd failed all my exams, like I said, so I felt lucky and privileged that I'd made it into college and had enough money to do something that wasn't just drink it and piss it up the wall. I haven't asked about swearing. I probably should have.
I think we'll be all right.
So I wanted a proper experience. I wanted a fully immersive experience, and I wanted to see something that was not my norm. And I think that's part of adventure as well, is putting yourself out of your comfort zone, putting yourself out of the normality.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I did, I spent the next 6 months traveling around Thailand, and I headed as far south as I could. I made it to Kuala Lumpur in the end, and I actually met people that ended up helping me, and transpired that I was related to them.
You're kidding me?
I'm absolutely not. And if that's not enough to hook you into adventure and traveling around the world, and enough to humble you, then I don't know what is.
We spoke about this, didn't we? They say, is it 7 degrees of separation? It's just not anymore, is it?
Yeah.
I think it's like 3.
It's funny, because when you were talking about that, I was thinking, well, you're from Scotland somewhere, but I'm not sure, and I need to ask you. So
northeast I'm from, north of Aberdeen, up near Peterhead, Fraserburgh.
Right, yeah, okay. I know exactly where.
A wee village called Mintlaw. Don't know if you've ever heard of it.
It's not on the coast, is it?
It's just inland.
Yeah.
Sort of bang in between Peterhead and Fraserburgh.
Okay, I know. Yeah. I know the area. It's that shoulder of Scotland, and you come back.
Why do you know that area then?
Well, I know all of the coast of Scotland.
Of course, you walked it. What am I talking about?
I don't know much else about Scotland.
Time for a quick shout out to this week's sponsors, who are Innov. Now, Innov specialise in motorcycle dashcam systems. You'll probably seen the vids on my channel. They've got the single camera, the C5. They've got dual camera, which are the K series, the K3 and the K5. K3's 1080, K5's 4K front, 1080 rear. Both the K3 and K5 have an external mic, which you can even wire up into your helmet and vlog with if you want. If you look at my California Superbike School Day vids, the audio, the onboard audio, is all via the Innov K5 system. They've also got GPS tracking. They've got an external remote, so you can lock footage as you go. They'll do that automatically anyway, should they detect any sudden movement. They've got parking modes on them, so when that's activated, even when your bike is left unattended and switched off, say you're a bike calf or park it up in a town or something like that, if the bike moves at all, then it'll automatically kick in and it'll start recording. So hopefully you'll get that car that hits your bike or anyone that does anything to your bike. As long as they're in front of those cameras, you'll capture them. Great system, folks. Invaluable in terms of any accidents for insurance, because the first thing your insurance is going to ask is there CCTV or witnesses? And if you have one of these Innov systems fitted, then you're covered. Providing you're in the right, you're totally covered. Well worth getting, folks. Head to the link down below. I've got the Innov UK website link down below. So if you're listening to the show notes, check that out. If you're watching the vid, have a look in the description. It is a referral link that just lets Innov know you've come from me, which helps me massively in terms of the sponsorship. It shows them they're getting bang for their buck. If you use the code TEAPOT, TEAPOT, then you'll get, I think it's 5% off any of the Innov cameras. And if you use the link to the Techologic website, they're the one that do like the DC1 and XV1 helmet cameras. If you use the code TEAPOT, you'll get 5% off them as well. So a huge thank you to Innov for all their support. We are also sponsored by Ultimate Add-ons. Ultimate Add-ons, they specialize in mobile phone and action camera mounting solutions for bikes, for push bikes, that sort of stuff. They provide dust-proof, drop-proof, really rugged cases for your phones, as well as a multitude of different mounting solutions for those phone cases and action cameras. Things like GoPros, DJIs, all that sort of stuff, Insta360s. Great bits of kit, They're great bits of kit, folks. Even when your phone is inside one of these cases, you can still use the phone, you can still use the camera, obviously as long as you keep the lens and everything clean. Great things, folks. I have never had any issues with vibration affecting my phone's camera when I use the Ultimate Add-on systems. I use the Helix strap mount. It's basically like a ratchet strap, really easy to fit. I can fit it to almost any bike I've ever taken out for a review. Great bits of kit. If you head to ultimateaddons.com and if you use the code TeapotOne10, so TeapotOne with the number 10 at the end, then you will get 10% off their range. Massive thanks to Ultimate Add-ons. Right, so Thailand, tick, you're home. Where'd you go next?
After Thailand, I did a bit of stupid cycling in Europe, and
What's that? Come on.
so I the only reason I came home from Thailand, I'd made it to Kuala Lumpur. I ended up meeting this family, who I then went to a wedding of my mum's second cousin, which is like totally bizarre. I didn't have a shirt or a suit or anything to wear, so I had to go into a market. I think I didn't have anything.
Did you meet these people randomly, or did
totally random? I got dropped off from a bus. It was about 3 a.m, mid of Kuala Lumpur. I had no idea what was going on. If you haven't been to Kuala Lumpur, it's equally as mad as Bangkok.
It is.
And it's incredibly built up, an amazing place. And somebody said to me, they said, "Hello, are you okay?" And I was really taken aback because their English was amazing. And I was like, I don't know where I am. I don't know what I'm doing. And they said, "Where are you from?" And I started chatting to him. His name was Willie. And so, okay, so he said, come and have some food. I'm a taxi driver, but I'm just going to have some food here. Turns out he's my nan's cousin. How mad is that?
That's
I
insane.
had no plan. And again, I didn't have a mobile phone, so it's not like I could get on the phone and ring my nan and go, it's 3 a.m. here in KL. You all right? I think I've met your cousin. So I couldn't check. And so it wasn't until I got home to England and told her, she said she just burst into tears because she said, you were there when you were 4.
Wow.
And I had all these feelings of thinking, oh, this is familiar, this is strange. The smell is interesting, like that nostalgic.
Yeah.
And she said, you were there when you were 4.
Have you had anything like that since in your other travels?
Yeah.
I just find that once one thing happens, it just seems to happen time and time and time again.
Yeah, it's so bizarre. So now I'm known in the family and amongst my friends as wherever we go, Chris is going to know someone. And I'll bump into people. I met people I bumped into someone in Dunnet Head, right? The most northern tip of Scotland, which is just like a limb. It's out in the middle of nowhere.
There's not much there.
I met someone there on a day that I'd walked there just after Storm Arwen, or during that storm, and they'd decided to come up from Cornwall with their other half to visit the lighthouse.
What, and you knew them?
Yeah. And not only did I know them, I'd known them since I was a child when I used to go on holiday in Cornwall. But
what are you like with lottery numbers?
Well, not successful. If I was, I wouldn't be here. Be somewhere else in the world doing something exciting. But so no, lots of things. I've been. I sailed around the Greek islands for a year, and I bumped into 3 people that lived on the road I grew up on. Totally random.
Right.
I went to Morocco. I surprised my wife for a birthday one year, and I took her to Morocco, and we went to the Yves Saint Laurent garden in the morning, and in the afternoon we were going off trekking into the Atlas Mountains for 10 days. We got on the coach into the Atlas Mountains, and the people sat next to us were from the village that she grew up in Derbyshire, but they were on holiday with friends that knew my mum. We were sat there thinking, what's
going on here? What is going on here? Matrix stuff.
Very odd.
Speaking of your missus, of your lovely missus, how does she feel about you constantly bugging her off to do these amazing adventures?
Often not well. No, she's my biggest supporter, really. I'd like to say she's a fan, but I think that's waned a bit. And so she's definitely my biggest supporter, and she's always there in the background helping me with social media or telling me that I can't do this, this and this because it won't look right or sound good or blah, blah, blah. Because she's much more in tune with the normal world than I am. And, but she's also really good at saying to our daughter's school, Chris is doing this. If you want him to show the kids where he's going, or if it's part of the curriculum, just get in touch with him. And then they do, and I end up doing Zoom calls with them or talking about geography or the history of a certain area. And that's lovely because it brings my kids and their friends along the same journey. Yeah. And it helps with my kids at home because it means they're not without a dad all the time. I'm there, but also their friends understand that I'm seeing things and helping them see things that otherwise they wouldn't. Yeah. But yeah, my wife, she can get a bit frustrated, but just like any family, we tend to deal with things as and when, and we just approach things together as a team, really.
And I take you must have met your missus, you were down the adventure line when your missus came into your life.
Do you know what? This is another amazing thing. So my wife has travelled a lot and done lots of awesome things on her own before we even got together. We met at university. We didn't get together till after university, blah, blah, blah. So... Remember my nan, who was from Malaysia, and my granddad was stationed in Malaysia in the Navy, and he met my nan there. Well, my wife's grandfather was a Royal Engineer, and he was stationed in Malaysia, and he played football for the Army. My granddad played football for the Navy. Bearing in mind, my wife grew up in Derbyshire, and I grew up in Kent, and we met in Cambridge. Our grandfathers played football against each other in Malaysia. And we only found that out after my grandfather and her grandfather died, and we found the newspaper clippings and all the records.
What do you make of that? There's got to be something going on, surely. That pure coincidence?
I don't, I'm a massive introvert and sort of a bit philosophical. I write angsty existentialist blogs most of the time, and I don't believe in fate or anything like that. Do you not? No, I just don't.
Even after all that?
Doesn't compute. for me, it's massive coincidence. And my wife teases me about it because she says there's more to it than that. It's got to be. And I say, but there can't be, because if there is, then my whole world paradigm has shifted. Yeah. And I can't believe that, because if that is true, then my whole life and the whole mental approach I've had to things is a lie.
I get that. I was like you before I travelled, and then since I've travelled, I'm now, I have the mindset like your wife has. I was very logical, very black and white. I didn't believe in all manner of different things. If there was no logic to it, nah, don't be daft, don't be crazy. Now I'm definitely much more open to stuff now.
So I think I'd partially agree, Bruce. So I think the thing is, I'm always been a bit black and white, but the thing for me is, I want to find something spiritual.
Yeah.
I've never had a spiritual bone in my body. I find it difficult with religion, especially. However, I feel like the outdoors and the natural environment is my spiritual home. I think that can do a lot for people. I think it's very educational. I think it's very healing. I think it's very humbling. But I also fully believe, and I'm committed to the belief in human beings being good for each other. Humankind is where it is. It's not some spurious belief in something you can't see or evidence.
And you find, like, the more you travel, the more you do, the more people you meet, you realise that everyone's the same. It doesn't matter who they believe in, what language they speak. Everyone's the same.
We're all the same, and part of the talk that I will be giving tomorrow, because I sneak preview, I haven't written a talk for the main stage tomorrow.
Are you winging it?
Deliberately, because I gave a talk recently at a university, and they were really interested, they were really excited, but in my head I was thinking, God, I've done this a few times now, and I'm a bit bored of it. So I'm going to an adventure festival, and why is everybody here? What do they want to hear? And the reality is, people want to hear the anecdotal stuff. They don't want me to list the things I've done, and because anybody could go and do that, or you could just read my bio or website or read an article. So tomorrow is going to be totally different, and there's going to be a bit of audience participation.
That's you lost half the crowd.
Yeah, I know. Just done myself a massive disservice. There's no audience participation. There's lots of Q&A section, and it might not be any photos. I haven't decided. It's just going to be what it is. And because the thing, I want to connect with people.
Yeah.
And I feel like that on stage. Sometimes you can feel very closed off up there, and you feel like you're kind of lording it over people, and that's not how it should be. And especially at an adventure festival, people have come to not just hear about adventure, they want to be brought along the adventure. They want to feel something. So I want to make people feel something. If I can do that, then they might remember it, and that would be more useful.
Yeah, definitely. I really enjoy the conversation part, hence why I started the podcast and do things like these. And when I do these talks, I kind of just sort of batter my way through the presentation, because I know people have always got questions, don't they? So, but what I find is a lot of people are a little bit reticent to put their hand up and ask questions in a group. So they come and find you in the bar afterwards, and then that's when people start doing their own sort of individual research, don't they? It's like, what happened here, and how did you deal with that? And you can really tell people in depth and detail about.
Yeah, absolutely. And without sounding like a desperate, lonely heart, I am here just by chance on my own this weekend. It was only decided yesterday that I'd be here alone. My family were coming, and some of my friends were coming. But it's turned out that I am away. So if I do get spotted at the bar or somewhere and people want to ask me stuff, I'm more than happy to talk, because I've got nothing else to do except for drink beer, and that's probably not good for anybody.
Yeah, I know where you're going to be later. You'll be in a heap. Avoid him in the red T-shirt, whatever you do.
I'm colourblind, don't worry.
Right, talking of audience participation, has anyone got a question? Yes, bud. So that was a question about mode of transport. Sorry, I'm just going to reiterate for the people at home. That was a question about mode of transport. Basically, walking, a bit too slow, but really good mixing with people. Motorbikes, very fast, good for covering distance, but you haven't got the same engagement with people. So this chap's gone for cycling as a happy medium.
I think this is a fantastic question. Absolutely brilliant, because I love driving. I will always love driving, because it's like, as a kid, I couldn't afford computer games, and kids these days are always on tablets or like in gaming chairs and doing stuff like that. But for me, driving is like the ultimate computer game, right? Because you've got to constantly think about what's behind you, what's next to you, what's there, what that sign means, what this means, how fast you go, and that in itself is an adventure. Whether you're going to the shop or whether you're driving 6 hours to come and talk to 5 people in an audience, but cycling, I have loved since I was, I don't know how small, and I've cycled across Europe and absolutely loved it with nothing but a small backpack and a bottle of water. And it's the best way to see a country and really digest it. So I think that's a good choice for you. However, walking, I read an amazing Victorian study about walking. The reason I love walking, and I've always loved walking, but and this is partly why I felt like I evolved from one thing to another thing by walking around the coast of Britain, just the distance and the level of time that I was walking. In the study, it talks about how the cadence and the rhythm of walking naturally is really conducive to thinking and the way the brain operates. And so your body physiologically works in tandem with the brain just by doing it. So we all think about marathon runners being at the peak of their game and the fittest people on earth, or Olympic rowers, for example, using every major muscle group, and they're Tour de France cyclists riding and their heart rate being 32 beats per minute. It's about average for a domestique. I know because I've done 3 stages of Tour de France. Not that I'm like name dropping or boasting there, but I've constantly measured my heart rate throughout my life doing different disciplines. My heart rate was lowest when I came back from walking the coast of Britain. And okay, I was walking a marathon a day and carrying a bit of weight, but training to run marathon after marathon after marathon and cycling long distances has made me fit for that one discipline. But walking brought my heart rate below any of them.
Wow. To
a level where that's my lowest ever heart rate recorded. The day after I got home from walking the coast of Britain, I was at 43 beats per minute. So, and I don't think that's just to do with cardiovascular response. I don't think that's just about cardio fitness. I think that's to do with stress levels. I think that's to do with your head being in an environment that is natural and outside. I think there's so many aspects at play there. But in terms of mode of transport, they all have their own amazing benefits. I'd agree. Push bike, cycling, road bike, brilliant way to cover ground and see a country. But in terms of health and fitness, I'd walk every day.
Wow, that's interesting. Anyone else got a question at the moment? Yes, bud. Me again, folks. Just another shout out for this week's sponsors, who are the Influencer Store. The Influencer Store helps you build your brand big or small, providing you with a solution and apparel. We help you to increase your fan base while supporting you with starting your own influencer clothing line with nothing more than just an idea or design, and there are no hidden costs. For more info, come check us out at theinfluencerstore.co.uk or drop us an email at online@influencerstore.co.uk for more information. And now, if you've got any of my merch over at TeapotOne.com, all of that is handed by Roger and Charlotte over at the Influencer Store. It's really good quality. It's British made. That's why I've gone with them. So a huge thanks to the Influencer Store. Lastly, folks, this is just one from me. It's a massive shout out to each and every one of you who's listened to the podcast, each and every one of you that watches the vids, both here and across on the main TeapotOne channel. Thank you very much for all your support. Thank you very much for engaging in the comments, liking and sharing the social media stuff, liking and sharing the vids. Sharing vids is a huge thing. Really is. You've got no idea how much that helps. You bump you up in the algorithm. So if you enjoy what you watch, what you listen to, share it amongst all your mates. And thank you very much. For all those of you over in the clan on Patreon, not much I can say except, a heartfelt thank you. You folks go that extra mile, and I really do appreciate it. I couldn't do this without your support. If you fancy checking that out, head to patreon.com/TeapotOne. Okay then. Let's get back to the chat. Oh, that's a good one. Right, that one was, in terms of Chris's kids, which adventure would he like them to do in terms of what they'd get from it, and what adventure would he prefer them to do in terms of being with father? That's about right. Is that right? Does that sum it up?
Wow, again, because are these guys plants? Have you
some good questions? Very good questions.
That's great, because I do a lot of schools talks and university talks, and a lot of the questions I get asked are about poo or bears. And, those are the ones just at the universities. The schools talks are even more interesting. But what a question! I think it's really tricky. So I've tried to gently instill a sense of adventure in my daughters. I've called them cubs since they were very small, and I think that alone gives them a sense of like they're wild. And certainly to me, they are bloody wild. So I take them up mountains all the time. Most recently in June, I took my twins we walked the Lycian Trail in southern Turkey, and then to finish, we summited Badagan, which is just over 2,000 meters.
With your two daughters?
Yeah, and it was like 40 degrees.
That's mega.
Yeah. So what the thing about that is, and this hopefully goes in part to answer the question, I want them to have the adventures they want, not the adventures I want. I realized on that trail and on that mountain that although they were happy and loving all of it, it was something I'd wanted to do for me. I didn't want to do it just for them. And as they get older, I want them to pick those adventures for themselves and really do things. But they'll come to me at the weekend or on a Friday and say, can we do this weekend? Or can we do that this weekend? And we'll just go. So I'll on a Friday night, I'll regularly pick them up from school in the camper van and won't even get changed. We'll just bundle down to Snowdonia or to Cornwall and we'll go up a mountain and we'll camp up a mountain. Brilliant. Or whatever it might be, or go to the coast somewhere and just I mean, they're not really interested in screens too much anyway. They're fairly young, but it's better than them sitting at home all weekend watching television and things. But the other thing is they love foraging. So if I can teach them things about that, or if I can come on foraging courses like this with them and they learn to eat certain leaves or certain berries or certain mushrooms, I'm equally happy with that. And every day can be an adventure when you're a kid, because you live in the now. You don't live in tomorrow or yesterday's drama. You live right now all the time. And I think that's partly what adventure should be for everybody, you know. Does that, I don't know if that's really answered the question, or if I've just like gone in a weird figure eight around.
So we spoke about your kids there. What are they getting from this adventure, and what do you want them to get from it? What have you got from these adventures? Like, is there one in particular of everything that you've done so far where you've been like, yeah, I'm chuffed that I've done that, I've attained that more than the others?
Well, you're asking just as good a questions as the audience now.
It's almost like I do this for a living.
It's like, yeah, I know. Yeah. So I would say, I think rowing the Atlantic probably cemented in me a sense of not just confidence, but confidence without arrogance, like a sense of drive, a sense of knowing who I was. Before that, all the things I'd done, I was doing selfishly, as I'd said. I'd deliberately set out on that particular adventure to raise money for a charity that was close to my heart. And I decided after all those selfish adventures previous that adventure in the future must have some resonance within me. It must have a purpose. It must be driven by purpose of some sort.
Yeah.
So if I could raise money for a good cause or raise awareness in some way, then that would be much better than me just doing a thing. So I raised just over £96,000 for Parkinson's UK. And it was great, and it was amazing, and I loved doing every bit of it. My grandfather had Parkinson's, and I just watched him decline as a child when I was growing up. So it really meant a lot to me. But that was a challenge like no other. It's not backpacking, it's not overlanding in Russia, it's not cycling across Europe, it's not, just walking. It's survival every day. There's no one else to rely on. You can't call your mum up and go, I pushed the wrong button on the washing machine. Do you know what I mean? It's like you're in the middle of an ocean. There's no one coming to help. If your water maker breaks, you've got to fix it. And that happened. And, there was a lot of things about that journey that taught us you're capable of anything. I've
heard with the rowing at the Atlantic, not wishing to pee on your chips or anything, but I've heard a lot of people have said it's not the physical challenge they thought it was, but it is the most mentally challenging thing they've ever faced in life.
Yeah, that does definitely not pee on my chips. It's absolutely right. It's and I think that's the same with a lot of adventure, to be honest, and that's why people like Jamie and myself, I don't know if I like the term adventure. I don't know if I've ever really liked it, but endurance athlete or endurance adventure is much better, because that endurance element is that nasty stuff that no one really wants to hear about. Yeah. The stuff that you have to put up with. And that is it. 80% mental, 20% physical. I'd say I never wanted to fail at anything. And I learned a really valuable lesson recently in early June this year, just before I went to Turkey. I was actually rowing around Britain in the GB Row Challenge. Now, I was going to be the first person to have not only walked around Britain, but to have rowed around it as well. Unfortunately, we were dramatically helicopter rescued off the Mull of Kintyre, having made it there from the Thames. So we got just over halfway around, and we did pretty well. I had an amputee on board. I was the skipper of the boat. I was very disappointed that we'd capsized, we'd sustained damage, and actually at a point off the Mull of Kintyre, I had to make the decision for rescue because we were being driven too fast to shore and the rocks than I could do anything about. So I had to make that call. And I don't see it as failure. And that was a big learning curve for me, because actually nothing's failure if you get feedback or learning from it.
Absolutely.
And at the time, I didn't really feel that way. I was very angry with myself. I was very annoyed. But the truth is, I'm a skipper that sent 4 other people home to their families. I could have been a skipper that lost 4 other people.
Totally.
And that adventure will always be there. If I ever want to do it again, I can go back and do it. And that's the point.
And talking of that UK row, it's sort of, in the rowing regards, it's held as almost higher regard than the Atlantic. People say that is tougher to row around the UK coast than it is to row across the Atlantic. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it is billed, the organisation bill it as the toughest rowing race in the world.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's true. And I've said to them, I don't know if you can call it that. But it's definitely got a lot of elements that other rowing doesn't have. An ocean crossing or a point-to-point crossing is literally get out into open water, keep rowing. Most of the time you're going to be blown pretty well in the right direction. Around the UK, there's so many different weather systems to think of, so many different tide changes. You know, every 6 hours you've got to be on it. You've got to know where you're going. You've got to do your navigation, your meteorology. The weather systems changed like that. When we left the west coast of Ireland, the east coast of Ireland, to come up to the west coast of Scotland just before Rathlin, it was 25 degrees, crystal blue skies, 2 knots of wind, no swells, literally mill pond. 45 minutes later, having started crossing the Irish Sea towards the Mull of Kintyre, 44 knots of wind, 4 metre swells, rising, and just nothing you could do, you know.
And I suppose it's not like there must be a certain element of it when you're crossing the Atlantic, whereby if you're having a really bad day and things aren't good, you're in the middle of the Atlantic, so you haven't got an option. Whereas if you're rowing around the UK, you can a lot of times see land. Yeah, that must be like even more a mental torture.
And so, this is a really good point, and this is exactly the point I made to GB Row as an organisation when they bill it as the toughest rowing race in the world. I have to say, well, it isn't. Is it? You've got to take every element into account. And so, for example, yes, that's true. However, you can row to any cove in the UK as long as you don't moor up to something man-made. You can drop anchor anywhere.
Ah, right, okay.
That's the rules.
Right.
Okay, and you're still unsupported. That's great. You don't have that option at sea.
No.
And once you're 600 miles offshore in the Atlantic, there is no rescue. So the option to have rescue rowing around Britain is pretty easy. You know, you just get on the radio and say, or you let your EPIRB off and you say, I'm in a bit of trouble. And you know from training, and you know, based on how good the RNLI and the Coast Guard are, that you're going to be okay. Yeah. On the Atlantic, it might be pretty straightforward, but you just don't know that you're going to be okay. So you live 105 days, or now, however quick people do it in, thinking, I could die today, you know.
Are you following, is it Damien, the Irish guy that's rowing to Galway as we speak? Are you following him?
I have loosely been following him. I'm more following Atlantic Escapade over there, obviously.
They're on the podcast, I think, tomorrow. I think they're on tomorrow.
Excellent. I'm loosely following. I was following a couple of other people as well. The thing is, there are so many ocean rowers out there now.
There seems to be loads now, doesn't there?
I'm keeping in touch with a couple of Marines that asked me to row the Indian Ocean with them in 2023. They've just been to the Perth Boat Show, and they're really nice guys. In fact, they are the guys that I bought my boat for when I crossed the Atlantic, and they're just brilliant guys, and I wish them a lot of luck. It's a row that's not been done before the way they're doing it, and I'd dearly love to be involved, but I'm not sure I will be. They've asked, but I haven't yet convinced my wife. So you'd have to let me know when this goes out live, because
Yeah, I did that. I did that about. I have this thing in my head about cycling around the UK. I don't know why, but
speak to Jamie.
Well, I literally I don't want to do any training. I just want to get on the bike and start going. And I sort of let that slip via podcast. So my wife happened to have somebody go, "Oh, when's Bruce heading off?" And she's like, "What? What are you talking about?"
Did you do it?
I haven't done it yet, but I've put it out there, so it's going to have to happen.
Ah, well, you will.
I just have to figure out when, logistics.
Yeah, well, you will. And that's the interesting thing, isn't it? And that whole sense of not training and just going at it.
Yeah.
Like Jamie said earlier, with the walk, I used to get interviewed by journalists, and I still do, and they say, well, how much training did you put in? How long were you preparing for? And the reality is I came up with the idea and I left 3 weeks later.
Awesome.
The only training that was involved is packing my bag, unpacking my bag, and getting rid of what I didn't need.
Yeah.
And I did that like 150 times, and I just decided on the rule that if you don't have more than one job, you don't come. And that's it. So I got right down to 12 kilos, and then, of course, I didn't expect it to take quite as long because of various lockdowns, and I ended up in Scotland in winter, and so I ended up coming home with between 25 and 30 kilos. So, but I felt just as good walking home with that as I did when I started.
Yeah. So, is there anything? What is next for you? What is the next challenge? Is there anything that you can make public or not?
World exclusive.
Yeah, go on. Yes, please.
Well, the press release is written. It hasn't gone out yet, but it will go out on Monday. And the reason it hasn't gone out yet is because there's just a few fine details being tweaked. So I'm going to be raising awareness for the National Trust, and I'm going to be planting some trees for the Woodlands Trust in all of the national parks in the UK, all 15 of them. And I'm doing that partly to set up legacy routes for walkers and runners, but also as a homage to our late Majesty the Queen, as part of her green canopy scheme. And what I'll be doing is running 15 marathons in 15 days in 15 national parks, planting 15 trees.
Wow.
Simultaneously to that, I'll be collecting soil samples and water samples in each park for Nature Metrics, a science organisation who collate that data and look at the eDNA in those samples to work out all different types of biodiversity in those areas.
When are you doing it, and where can people follow?
I will be starting around the 27th of November this year. You can still follow me at my Coastwalker pages on socials. My website is thecoastwalker.com. I haven't started fully training because I just haven't had the time. Quite frankly, a lot of this stuff requires a lot of logistics, a lot of planning, a lot of meetings, etc. So the biggest hurdle I've had with this is that I'm working with two organisations fundamentally, the Woodlands Trust, who are supplying the trees and helping me with the green canopy scheme. Then I'm working with the national parks themselves, but I can only plant the trees in woodlands that are managed by the Woodlands Trust within the national parks. So my route is determined by that end point where I plant the tree.
Yeah.
And so each day will be very different because, for example, I will start somewhere up in Loch Lomond. I'll run that and then have something like a 5-hour drive across to the Cairngorms. And then from there, I'll have I think it's about another 5-hour drive down to Northumberland. And then from there, I've only got a few hours drive across to the Dales and then the Moors. So I get 2 shorter days, which really I'm looking at as my rest period.
I was going to say, is that your recovery time then?
Yeah. So the longer the distance between the parks, the shorter my recovery time. Yeah.
Folks, before we call it, that's nearly an hour. Has anyone got any other questions they'd like to ask? Yes, bud. Gotcha. So, question was, folks, meeting people when you're away doing these adventures, traveling, is it a great thing or is it a convenience? An inconvenience?
It's great. Again, amazing question, and it's really difficult to answer because, there are times in adventure when you are on the bones of your ass. And you just don't want to speak to anyone, like not even your wife or your children, and you don't even want to have a conversation with yourself. And that becomes really hard because the only person going to motivate you to get up again is you. So it gets really, really tricky. But honestly, with the family in Malaysia and with other people that I've met, I have a fascination about it. And I always am a bit humbled by it because I think this is where I came from. There's an element of like, I wouldn't be doing this now And realistically, what I'm doing now could be understood if I knew a bit more about them and where they are and who they are. And so I only found out that there was a relation in that family from Malaysia that walked across America. But I'd never heard of him. I'd never met him. He's no longer alive. But I mean, at the same time, it makes you think evolutionary-wise.
It's in your blood.
There's something there. And also, when I got to the south coast, a little bit just up the road from here to the Somerset coast, sort of Minehead and further along, Quantocks, East Quantock Head, that sort of area, both my mother's brothers, my uncles, met me on the beach. Dismal day at St. Audrey's Bay, right? Like, I think that's what it's called. Wet as anything. I'm sopping wet. I've got a friend with me who's trailing behind because he's on holiday, effectively. He's come to join me for a walk and saying he can do this too. And the reality is he hadn't got a clue what was involved, and he's probably 10 miles behind me by this point because I can't hold myself back and wait for him because I've got a focus and I've got a goal in mind for the end of every day, because if I don't keep to that, then I'm not going to get home when I said to get home, and I won't see my kids when I said to see my kids. So out of the distance and the mist and the fog and the rain, this figure emerges on the sand, and I'm looking and thinking, I know who that is. Just by the way they were moving, I knew who it was. And I hadn't mentioned it at the time, but I ended up writing a whole blog about a family disconnected. We don't have a great relationship. In fact, my uncles and I and my cousins, we all joke and say, I'll see you at your funeral. Because that's likely when we'll next see each other, right? Because we're just not close. We get on, that's not it, but we're just not close geographically and we're not close emotionally. However, my friend said, God, when I caught up to you all, there was like 4 of you, because there was my 2 uncles, there was me, and then there was my uncle's cousin. So I guess my second cousin, does that make it? I don't know how it works. But and we were all walking in a line towards, what's the power station that's being built down, the Hinkley Point. And he said, and I couldn't tell you apart from behind because you all walk in the same way. And I was like, oh, what? We were different shapes and different heights. He said, you all have the same walk. And when he said that, the more I looked at their mannerisms and different things, and then I got to go and see my second cousin's dad, who was my granddad's brother, and he just stood in the doorway and reminded me of my granddad, like, absolutely. And it was just that weird thread of blood running through us. And so that really intrigues me and fascinates me. And so I hope it never becomes a chore to meet people that are extended family because, I do find it fascinating.
Right, that's us hit the hour. Folks that are here, thank you very much for your questions, for joining in. Hope you've enjoyed it. Folks at home, hope you've enjoyed this one. Make sure you head to Chris's socials. If you're listening to the podcast, check out the show notes. If you're watching the video, have a look at the description. I'll leave all these links down there. Make sure you donate to the is it the National Trust for the next one?
Interestingly, having just done the walk around the UK and depleted my fundraising pool somewhat, and I think I've raised something like £250,000 for charity in the last 10 years at least. 45 of which is for BBC Children in Need, which I've just handed over. I'm not raising money for the Woodland Trust.
Oh, okay.
I'm raising awareness, and I'm raising awareness for the environment, and the more important thing behind it is to collect that data sample for the science to be studied. So it's more about our environment and making sure that, and actually going into winter and shorter days, I want to make sure that I'm giving people something positive to think about. And people suffer from seasonal affective disorder. They find it difficult to motivate themselves and get out in dark days. So I just want to bring beautiful places to them and make sure that they can keep getting out.
Mega bud. Right, folks. Well, just make sure you check his socials, give him some support, and follow along when he does this next challenge. Mate, I could sit and chat to you for hours. I'd love to get you on the podcast for real the next time, and we'll have a bit longer and get some questions and go from there. Been an absolute pleasure. Right, folks, hope you've enjoyed this one. Keep doing your thing. Look after those that you love. Get on out there whenever you can. But most importantly, live your life.
Awesome.
Cheers, folks.
Thank you for your questions. Amazing questions.
Pleasure, man.
Thanks, Bruce.